Hi, this is Dr. Quevedo. Thank you for watching. In this video, we will discuss some of the basic concepts for a distributed database system. As you might have noticed, for this presentation, we will use as reference some of the PowerPoint materials prepared by the author of our textbook. To better understand the concept of distributed database, let's first discuss what is distributed computing. In a distributed computer environment, instead of having just one computer performing all the required tasks to execute a given application submitted by a user, we have now multiple processing units that cooperate to execute the same task. So we're distributing, let's say, we can say like subsections or segments or fragments of each one of the tasks required to complete the whole single application. And something important to see is that when we're distributing, it doesn't have to be just data. I mean, as you can see in the PowerPoint that I'm showing here on, which is page 3, it says that it's also the processing logic, the function, the data control. Now, I like in the textbook there is a figure in which they illustrate a map with when you see all continents, and you see that there are about 6 data centers distributed all over those different continents, and each one of those is labeled as a data center, and they are connected by a network. And the idea of distributed computing will be that, for example, maybe any user that submit a specific that wants to execute on a specific application for to be processed, there may be a part of that application that will be processed maybe in North America. There will be maybe another section that will be processed in South Africa, and so on. And then all together will cooperate to provide the answer. And specifically when we're talking about distributed database system, what we will have is that we will distribute the database. Now the database is will be data that has some logic. I mean, we design a structure that has some logic in which in a single database that we want to extract data from the database by using a querying system. So then the distributed database will be it says logical interrelated databases. So these databases may be multiple sections of fragments of a database, and they are all distributed over a computer network. So that will be the distributed database. Now, for this, we need a software that will be able to manage, because I mean, if we want to process a query in section of the data, let's say that we have a table employees that we want to solve a specific query about some employees, and some of the data is in Dallas, and another fragment of the database for the table employees is in New York. So we have to have some type of system, which will be the DBMS, the database management system, that will be that's going to be the responsible to provide some transparency. I mean, when we are solving the database, I mean, the task that is submitted, the user doesn't have to know where the sections, and doesn't have to do anything. He's just submitted the query, and it's responsibility that we just provide the user with the answer. We don't need to ask for the user, oh, you had to do this to make a connection or find this data. I mean, the one responsible for doing all of that will be the DBMS. So then, the main concept here. distributed database system. The distributed database system, and this may be a question in the quiz, has two components, and those are the components that we're discussing now. One of the components is a distributed database, and the second component of a distributed database system is the distributed DBMS. So just remember, there are two main components there. Now, for the next part, students often confuse that maybe the database, just a single database, is located in one of the nodes of the computer networks, and then we just access the database through the network. I mean, it's like accessing a remote database. That is not a distributed database. So the concept is we have to have fragments of the database in multiple sites. And remember the concept that we were discussing about distributed computing. There will be units that will be cooperating. So if we have multiple fragments, there will be some type of cooperation to solve required tasks. On the next slide, there is another graph that shows a distributed database system environment that has 4 sites. So we're assuming that there is a site for this company, probably Boston. There's Boston, there Paris, Waterloo, and San Francisco. So you can see in Boston, it says in the picture that they keep a record of Boston employees, Paris employees, and Boston projects. And in Paris, they have Paris employees. Also, there must be a section of Boston employees, because you see that there are employees in Boston employees in Paris and in the database. So now we also had to discuss if there is replication. The cases that we will study here will not involve replication, so then we will make an assumption for this case that the Boston employees that are stored at Boston and the Boston employees that are stored in Paris, they have no intersection, they have nothing in common. So for some reason we decided maybe it's a very large database. A section of that database is going to be maintained in Boston and another section is going to be maintained in Paris. So similarly, just looking into the diagram is just indicating what sections of the database will be stored in all those 4 different sites. To conclude with the presentation, let's just have some assumptions about some basic assumptions about the distributed database system. So the data will be stored in multiple sites. Now we had to have some type of logic, because we were talking about a single database, so it has to have like a global logic. Like for example, we're talking about employees, so we're keeping records of employees, and then for the employees, maybe we're gonna keep the identification, name, salary, and maybe the position, then whatever it is what we have to decide that we need to keep track of. But there may be also part of the logic is that employees will work in projects for a number of hours, or for a percentage of time of the time of something like if they are full-time employees, maybe 30% of the time or 70% of the time they're working another project. But I mean, that's part of the logic. But we said it has to have some type of logic, even though the data is distributed. Now we have all these units connected by a computer network. Now, this is not a collection of files. That's what we talk about the logic. I mean, there will be some type of logic that we have to follow to extract the data. In a database, what we want to process is we want to query the information that is in there. That's what we store the data. And we're not talking about this being a remote file system. Finally, there are 2 things here that we need to keep in mind. The logic is integrated, but there is a physical distribution on those multiple sites. Okay, thank you for watching this video.